we spoke about how JQuery gives us the ability to write very concise code. Okay, so going back to our discussion, in order to work with any jQuery elements, any elements in a HTML page, you essentially use a criteria which we call as selectors in order to access those elements and then perform those actions as a group. You will be seeing different kinds of selectors. The first type of selectors are essentially called as element selectors. So in case of element selectors, in order to select the element, you would be specifying the HTML tag that defines that particular element. So if you go back to the page that we had, go back to the code that we had various HTML elements within the body. So div is one HTML element, font is another HTML element. Any element which has a closing and ending tag is going to be recognized by your jQuery selectors. So here I have my div elements, table, tr, td. Any of those can be directly specified using your element selector. If you want to perform an action for a particular type of elements, then you just define that element name using the syntax $ for invoking the jQuery function, and then the element name followed by whatever method or action you want to perform on. If you want to retrieve a bunch of elements based on the classes, style sheet classes that are assigned to it, you would have to say $, and then I mean, if you want to be particular about the type of elements, then you can say paragraph or cell or whatever. If you don't specify anything, it looks for any HTML element which uses this particular class name. Going back to our code, where did we use classes? So in this particular case, we used a CSS class called myFont. Similarly, if you have used a CSS class elsewhere, so here I have a CSS class called background. So if I want to retrieve elements, and you can potentially have more than one element in the page which uses the same a CSS class. So if you want to select the elements by the style sheet class that they are associated with, then you have to just specify $ and then whatever that element type is, dot class name. You can exclude the element type, then it selects all the HTML elements that have this particular class name. If you're anyway going to get those elements based on the class name, why do you have to specify the element prefix? Let's say in a page I have 1000 paragraph tags, and not all of them might have this class associated with them. So if you're interested in only 5 of them, I think putting in the element type dot class name would make it faster compared to looping through all those elements. You can also retrieve the elements based on their IDs, and it is always a good practice to assign a unique ID to all the elements that you use in a HTML page. Irrespective of you using it for jQuery or not, it's always a good idea to assign IDs to elements so that you can retrieve them if needed. In jQuery, you can retrieve an element by its ID using $, and then in brackets, you have to specify hash and then whatever that element ID is. So if you go back to our code, in order to, let's say, retrieve the value of this login field, we wrote earlier login ID is equal to document.get element by ID txt login dot value. If I have to do the same with jQuery, I have to just specify $. My element ID is txt login, and then say val. When you do this, it is going to return the value associated with this particular login element. The selector that I've used is an ID selector. If you use hash, it means an ID selector. If I use a dot extension, then it means a class selector. And then you also have element selectors, this is the element selector. In this case, I replaced using the element selectors. These are the three basic selectors you have: element, class, and ID selector. But in a very complex document, you might have a very deep nested hierarchy in order to get to the element that you're interested in. And at that time, just these three options will not help. Here I put in a list of other options that you have, and I don't think you guys are familiar with CSS 3 specification, which is one of the reasons why HTML5 is so advanced. But these selectors are based on what has been defined for CSS3 specification. So if you've done quite a bit of work with style sheets and stuff, you would be able to relate to this particular syntax. Here I'm just showing you a few examples, or a few lists of selectors. I mean, these are some of the options, not all of the options, but using this you should be able to get to most of it. Dollar and then specifying star gets all the elements that are there in your HTML page. I took most of this material from the W3 Schools website, and there is actually a sample page. We will do the same example here. Obviously, I didn't take their code. I'm just copying the content that is there in the page, and I'm building the HTML. So here in this page, on the right hand side, you see a HTML with header tags, div tags, paragraph tags, multiple paragraph tags. UL stands for unordered list. I mean, in order to display it with bullet points, you use UL HTML tag in UL in HTML. So similarly, you have paragraphs, H3, table, a whole bunch of tags in order to display the information. On the left hand side, they've given you these various selectors that are there. So if I want to just select the last name, the element that starts with last name, here I click on hash last name, and here it is highlighted on the right side. Span ID equal to last name. That is the element. So this element is highlighted here. The way they are highlighting this is by using JQuery in the background. They are fetching this element and changing the background and the border color for this particular piece of text. Similarly, if I have dot intro, it is fetching all the elements which have the class intro in it. So if you look at the code here, div class equal to intro, it's using a style sheet class called as intro. The beauty of jQuery is that you can apply multiple selectors at the same time. So I can say class equal to intro and get me the last name selector. So you will see two options highlighted here. The first, class equal to intro, has selected this element, and the class equal to the ID equal to last name has selected this element. Once you have those two elements, if you want to, let's say, hide, if you just type in .hide, those elements will be immediately hidden. In this case, so this is an example of, the first one is an example of an ID selector. Second one is an example of a class selector. Third one is an example of class and ID selector mixed together. And the way you mix things is by using commas. So each one of them can be a separate criteria in itself. The fourth one is an element selector. It is looking for all H1 elements in the page. Where do you have H1 in the page here? This text is highlighted in large bold with H1 tag, and that's probably the only one which is highlighted. So if I click on this, so you'll see that this is highlighted in this page, the H1 elements. If I want to highlight all the header elements and the paragraphs, you click on this, all of this is highlighted. When you are implementing your code, you wouldn't be doing any of this fancy stuff. Right now, this example is more from a learning perspective. It is just showing how you can get to an element irrespective of wherever it is in the page. JQuery is essentially building the hierarchy and traversing the hierarchy of elements to get to the elements that you are interested in. So that is the only point that you need to note, and you don't need to know all the selector options. As long, using JQuery, you should be able to get to any element in the page in an unobtrusive fashion. You don't need any additional help in that regard. So this is, we'll do some examples. You see here, you'll see that there are quite a few advanced options. If I do p:\, first child, it means get me the paragraph, get me the first child of paragraph element. So this is the first paragraph element, which is the child in the hierarchy. P last child gets me the last paragraph element in this hierarchy. So similarly, you will have a whole bunch of other options. Again, we don't need to go through all of them here, but the idea is you would be able to get to the elements you are interested in using some of these options that you see here. So besides class, element, and ID selectors, you also can mix them up using additional criteria that you see here. This always represents the current element, and the reason why you would use it is if you are handling some events associated with a particular element, you would typically be using this and then saying, if you're writing a generic function, then say val or value to fetch the value of the current element that has been selected on. So this pertains to the current HTML element. Any syntax with dot indicates the class style sheet classes, and prior to the style sheet classes, if there's an element name, this indicates get me all the paragraphs which have the class intro in it. Instead of a dot, if there is a colon, that is a sub criteria that needs to be used. So the first criteria I have is get me all the paragraph elements, but I am interested in only fetching the first paragraph element. So p:\, first indicates the first paragraph element. p:\, last indicates the last paragraph element. So you have a whole bunch of selectors. I have listed them here, but here we are just going the various ways in which you can select these elements in the page. If I have this kind of a syntax, and instead of a comma, if I have UL is unordered list, within the unordered list you have multiple list items which are essentially bullet points. It's li first child. So this essentially selects the first li element of every unordered list. So if in your page, if there are two unordered lists, so in this page there's only one unordered list. If there is more than one unordered list, it gets the first li element of every unordered list in the page using this UL blank space li : first tag. So similarly, you also have this first child option to select the first element of every unordered list. I think more than talking about them, if you do a few examples, I think it will help out. What you would need to know is the different types of selectors. So we spoke about the three basic selectors. In addition to three basic, if you have some sub criteria that you want to use, standard sub criteria like first child, last child. There are also other properties like siblings, next sibling, previous sibling, some generic sub criteria. You always use colon. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but in the very first example that we did, I think it was probably hello.html. We were trying to retrieve the value of the checkbox item. and there we were using in order to get the value of the checkbox item, you will see in the code we have said dot checked dot val. So what have we done here? If you look at the syntax, if you have anything in square brackets, it means elements having this attribute. So it is trying to look for all the elements that has the attribute name and whose value is RD country, and the sub criteria is checked should be equal to true. These are predefined sub criteria like first, last child, checked, disabled, enabled. All of these are predefined sub criteria. So you can leverage any of those in order to get to the element. So using this approach, we were able to directly retrieve the value of the checkbox. So whenever you use square brackets, it means you're looking for elements having that particular attribute. In addition, you have other options to compare the attribute values and then select those elements. So let's say I'm interested in all hyperlinks in the page that are opening up in a new window. In order to open up a hyperlink in a new window, you typically have in the HTML tag for the anchor link target equal to underscore blank. That is the property you typically populate, so that when you click on the link, it opens up a new page with the href URL that has been provided. So in this particular case, in order to select all those elements, I'm saying so get me all the anchor tag elements in my page, where since you have the brackets here, where the attribute target is equal to underscore blank. So it retrieves all those elements with that particular value. You also have other kinds of comparison of operators. You can also say where this attribute is not equal to. So you do have other options also to say if the attribute value contains or if the attribute value starts with or ends with. I'll show it to you in a minute. And you also have some other predefined criteria called even and odd, which can be used to leverage to access alternate elements based on your needs. Like in this page that you see here, my alternate rows are highlighted in gray color. So you can retrieve the odd columns and set the background color to white, and even columns and set the background color to gray. And you don't need to set it for each and every row that is listed here. Just do tr.even, and that will get you all the even rows, and then sys.css, set the background color property to black or white or whatever color that you want it to be. These I actually have listed all the selectors in the next 2 or 3 slides that you would ever need to use. I don't think it will be more than that. But again, don't try to remember it. And just it is suffice to know that using the selectors, you would be able to get to any element in your HTML page. There will be some option or other using which you would be able to get to it. We looked at all of this. ID selector, we looked at it. Class selector, we have looked at it. You can mix ID, class, element, or other kinds of selectors by using comma. So you can always do that, and you have examples here. We also spoke about element selectors, and you can also select multiple element. You can have multiple element selector criteria using the comma again. So in this example, I am selecting all the h1, div, and paragraph tags in my HTML page, and then performing some action. These are some of the standard sub-criteria filters that I was telling you about. If your search criteria returns, let's say, 100 elements, if you do dot first, it returns that first matching criteria. Last returns you the last element, which is the 100th element. Dot even returns you 50 elements out of those 100 rows, which are even numbers. Odd returns you again 50 rows. of that data, or 50 elements, which alternate. So typically we use this odd and even for styling your table rows and stuff. So these are self-explanatory: first child, last child, nth child. But the point that you need to know here is, if you have a colon, you are using some predefined criteria that is applied for and that is predefined in your JQuery selectors. Besides this predefined selectors, you do have other operators. So if I use a greater than sign, what it means is it essentially defines a parent and child when you use a greater than sign. So div gets me all the div elements in the page that have a child element called P. So it doesn't retrieve all the, sorry, I stated it incorrectly. When you say div is the parent here, and on the right hand side of the operator you have the child. So you're retrieving all the child elements that are directly under the div tag. In your HTML page that we had earlier, there is one paragraph tag that is directly under div element. If I have, let's say, another paragraph tag here, as part of the selector, when you fetch using those greater than operator, it will retrieve those elements only if they are direct children of the parent. So in this case, this is a child of this particular parent, so it will get you this parent element. In this case, the parent for this P element is the TD element and not essentially the div element. So if you have such a criteria, you use a greater than sign, using which you can retrieve the direct children and not the descendants of it, although there might be some other descendants which have the same elements. So doing a blank space gets you all the child elements that are descendants of the parent. So in this, if you use this syntax, div blank space P, it would have fetched me both this element, which is directly under the div tag, and also this P element, which is somewhere down in the hierarchy. It doesn't care whether it's a directly child of the div element or not. It just fetches you those paragraph elements. Okay. Plus so div plus P is more for your kind of siblings, right? If they are at the same level. So if you have a parent under which there is a div tag and also a P tag, those elements are essentially returned back. Again, I don't want to read through this entire list. You guys take a look at it. What should be of interest to you is whatever we have discussed so far, the types of selectors, basic selectors, and then some predefined criteria that are there to get to the first, last, and all of that. And there are some operators using which you can define whether you want to retrieve the direct child or all the descendants or the final descendant of that particular element. What you would be using more commonly is, more than this standard predefined ones, what you would be using are these attributes in order to get to your elements. And when you are using these attributes, you can retrieve an element by the attribute name and value. So you can specify, in our case we said name equal to RT country list or whatever. So it got me all the elements that were radio buttons. You also have a not equal to property. You have a dollar equal to, which means that that attribute value ends with whatever is specified in this value field. So href dollar equal to .jpg is going to get me all the anchor links which reference a JPG file or a JPEG file. So it's more like a searching for contains. Dollar equal to looks for the characters matching the end of it. Your caret equal to gets you the attributes matching starting with that particular value. So you can do either equal to for property values, or not equal to, or ending with, or starting with, using this attribute filters. Okay, all the different types of input elements, you do have these methods, but what you most commonly use is, if you're working with input elements, most probably the selected and checked, that is used for radio buttons and checkboxes. And yeah, that would be mostly it. Otherwise, these are meant to indicate that get me all the input elements and stuff. These are the various selectors. Once you get a selector, once you get a bunch of elements, you would apply some of these standard methods like hiding, showing, fading in. I mean, you have a whole bunch of things that you can do in JQuery. I've listed some of the sample methods here, but we'll be looking at these methods by the kind of functionality or the purpose of those methods in a minute. Besides changing the look and feel, or retrieving or setting the values of elements in your page, JQuery is also used to handle different events. What do I mean by event? User goes and clicks on a button. That's an event. That's a click event. If the user does a double click, it's a double click event. If the user is doing a mouse over a particular element, it's called mouse enter, and the moment your mouse is taken out of that, it's a mouse leave event. Key press, key down, all of these events are essentially used to create some kind of an animation effect. Similarly, form events, which you will most probably be working with, is submit. Submit is when the form is ready to be posted, when the information in your document is ready to be posted to the server side. So if you want to intercept the event and do some validation before you actually submit the request to the server, you can write code in the submit event. Change event is typically for if the values in the input elements are changed. So if you change the drop-down selection, or if you change the text in the text box, this change event is going to be triggered. Focus and blur events, when you click on a particular element, it gets the focus event is triggered, and blur, the moment that particular element loses control, blur event is triggered. Page level events, we saw a brief example of the document load. As soon as the document is loaded, if you want to initialize some data, it is especially important in the context of Ajax. You would use the load method. Resize, and resize is if you resize your browser window. Scroll is if you're doing scrolling, if you want to intercept that. And unload is when the document is being unloaded and a different URL is being loaded up. So you can handle all of these events using JQuery, and I've put in a few examples on how you go about doing that. Any questions? This focus and blur, these kind of events are more from a styling perspective. So I'll show you a simple example. So if you see this login page, this looks much better than what we had, and we could have created a similar page without much programming. All we needed was some clean style sheets, and we could have easily done it. Right now my mouse is in the username field, so this text field is highlighted with a blue border. I don't know if you guys have noticed it or not. If I click on password, now the password field is going to be highlighted in blue, and the username field is no longer highlighted in blue. How would I implement such a requirement? What we have essentially done is they have coded for the on blur event and the on focus event. When you click on this control, immediately the on focus event is triggered. So in the on focus event, I would write a piece of code which would set the border color for this text box to blue. In the on blur event, I would change the border color from blue to gray or whatever the default color was. And the same function would be called for the input elements that I have on the page. So that is more of a use case on why I would essentially be coding for some of those events. Second thing could be if I resize my browser, you'll see that it is always centering to whatever my size is. So how could they have done that? They would have written code so that whenever you resize, window.resize event is triggered, and in that they would change the style sheet property to set the top and the left coordinates for this particular element. So as I am resizing this window, this is also getting resized, and it will get resized only to a certain limit. If I go beyond the actual width of it, it will not be centered. So so in order to do things like this, you would be writing code in JavaScript. This is not server-side code. This code is essentially you're responding to the resize event. If you have scrolling, focus, and blur are two scenarios where I'm using here in order to highlight these elements by changing their style sheets. So my selector would be, since it's a simple page, get me the login field using the ID, and then I would change the CSS property of this particular element and set the border color to blue. Okay, we can again do this example, but just to show you some use cases there. So here I just showed a simple example. Instead of the border color, I'm changing the background color of the input. If on any input, so in this particular example, what I've done is multiple input elements, right? You had a login ID text box, you had a password text box, and then you had radio buttons. All of these are input elements. So in here, I'm going to put in code. I'm just copy pasting the code that I got from there. This is straightforward. So here all I'm doing is when you're coding with JQuery, always remember one thing. It's very important to close the functions correctly. So I'm typing it from scratch again. So I would do $ in brackets. I'm specifying all input elements, any HTML element that is of type input. I'm closing this, and I'm coding for the focus event or the blur event. When I do this, and within this, I'm writing the JavaScript function that would need to be invoked. So for any function, it starts with a curly brace and ends with a curly brace. So always indent your code properly so that you don't miss this. So this curly brace and this curly brace are meant to close each other out. And you still have this bracket open, so I would need to close it, followed by a semicolon. In JavaScript, it's a good idea to put in semicolon after every statement. Even though this is in multiple lines, this is a single statement that we are using. I mean, I'm putting it in multiple lines for better readability. It can be in a single line, and it will work fine. And indent your code properly. So here, within the function, if I'm calling other functions or whatever, I always maintain it correctly. So I'm doing $ and I want to get the current element, you'll see that the current element is not in quotes, and I want to change the background color to whatever it is. So now when you run this code, it should work fine. So did the original elements come with this particular style? No, you are changing it dynamically. So going back to the tab selector page, okay, so now if I click on it, you'll see that my background has been highlighted to gray so that the user knows that you are entering in text here. If I click on it here, this has become white and the next one has become gray. So these kind of things make your application look cleaner than what it is. Again, I didn't put in any proper style sheets and stuff. You can see the difference between this and this, how good it looks, although we pretty much have the same. Okay, so I want you guys to try out this example with the HTML that I've provided. I'll leave the screen open like this, and then I think it's 5:10 right now. At 5:20, we can start discussing some other stuff. So this is the code that you guys would need to type in the page that I've just sent. Okay, so we will be doing some simple examples right now, and last session I think we will do a project similar to what you would do with Salesforce. So, or if you guys have some things to be done at work, let me know. We can look into how to plug in JQuery into accomplishing whatever you need to do. Okay, so try this out. I will meet at 5:20.
For force.com IDs, Vikram, the Java developer is recommended. So here we cannot develop. I don't see any web application development. So do we have anything add-on like that so that we can also develop?
Force.com ID is based on Eclipse, Rani. Yes. I am not going to touch upon Visual Force now. I think Harish is going to cover that. But when you actually work on it, you can look at that. And it is, I mean, it is a plugin on top of Eclipse. So,
Rani, for the Force.com IDE, rather than downloading just the Force.com IDE, what I would suggest is first download the Eclipse version. I think there's
so I'm showing you the Eclipse version. Yeah, Eclipse Juno is what it is running. So you can download Eclipse Juno, and then that plugin will work even on this version of Eclipse.
Yeah, I'll have to check that, Vikram. I think there is some restriction of the Salesforce plugin does work with Eclipse, and I will send you what that version number of Eclipse is. So you can actually download that, that particular version of Eclipse, and then enable the Force.com plugin within that. Now with that, you would have all the other the Java development environment and all the other environments along with the Salesforce environment as well. And based on what kind of development you're doing, you just have to change the perspective within the Eclipse, the development perspective within the Eclipse, and that will reflect, you know, if you change to Salesforce, it will have a Salesforce perspective, or if you're doing web development, you change to Java or something else, and it will reflect that. So yeah, that could be.
Okay.
Yeah, if you go on the window, and then you'll have an option to change the perspective, so you should be able to switch between applications.
Okay. 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 Thank you. Thank you, Prasad.
Any other questions? Okay. So in that case, we'll continue with our discussion. So we were talking about these various events that you can handle using jQuery. Pretty much all the JavaScript events that is handled is also supported with jQuery. The notation is kind of different, and flow is also different. Typically, on-click events are defined on the elements itself. But with jQuery, I think it's better to define your event separately and then the corresponding function that you want to handle as part of it. These are some of the methods that are there. Again, we categorize them. This is also there on the W3 website based on the kind of functionality that it supports. So for providing special effects, to hide the selected elements, you can just call the hide method and it will automatically hide it. Show displays the hidden elements. Toggle, if it is hidden, it displays it. If it is already visible, then it hides it. So earlier, and I'll just show you this website. This is again built on top of jQuery. So this website is built on jQuery. So if you click on any of these menus here, I click on this section is expanded so that I can select any of these options and do it. When I click on this icon again, you'll see that it expands and collapses. I could have written it with, what you're doing is, in JavaScript, for any element, any layer element like div or span tags, it provides an, as part of the browser object model, it provides, it used to provide a HTML tag, a method using which you can hide or display elements. So let's say I'm interested in getting a particular div element by ID. So some div element, and in order to do with straight JavaScript, in order to hide the element, I would say style dot display equals none in order to hide it. In order to show it, I would do style dot display equal to visible. Now these values are not the same between IE and Netscape, Firefox, your Chrome, and all of that. IE goes with style and style.display. The properties are different for Firefox, and even the values are different. I think the value is either inline, it's not visible, it's actually inline. So this two lines of code is different based on the browser that this particular page is being viewed in. Going with jQuery addresses all of those incompatibilities, because now all I have to do is I have to just say $, the element that I'm interested in. Since I know the ID, I'm going to put in hash and say d_test. I'm going to close it and then say toggle. What would this do when this function is invoked by clicking on a button or an icon or whatever that event is? When this code is invoked, it is going to, if it is already expanded, it is going to collapse it. If it is collapsed, it's going to expand it with the toggle option. If I just put in hide, it is always going to hide the content. So in order to implement what you have seen in that demo earlier, I'll have to say $hash d_test in order to display, you would use it. So you would first check if this is hidden, and if it is hidden, then you would say do something. So I would say $hash d_test is hidden, then show, else hide it. Instead of writing all those lines of code, using a toggle will just toggle the content that is displayed. Again, we can probably try it out, but it'll look exactly the same. So if I use toggle, it is switching it. There are other features. I mean, when you do toggle, if you given a time interval in milliseconds, it is going to create an animation effect where it is going to appear slowly rather than appearing immediately. So as part of this toggle method, you can specify the animation duration so that it opens up slowly. I'll do that example. Before I do that, I just wanted to show you something else. On the same website, if I click on this here, this layer is expanded to the left, and if I click on this, it is again collapsed. So it gives the look that it's slowly sliding up. So those methods are essentially, the way you do it is by using fade in and fade out. Those are again JQuery methods. So hide, show, and toggle we just described. Fade in, fade out, and fade toggle again to give that animation feel, and it slowly is hidden. Let me go back to the JQuery site. So here I click on hide, the text is hidden. Click on show, the text is now displayed. Similarly, you want to try this fade in, fade out. So this fade in, fade out, you'll see that this box is being initially hidden, and when I click on it, it appears. Going back to our example, when we validated the login credentials, we were displaying error messages. We can also make them fade out or fade in based on the error message itself. So here we are saying document.getElementById inner HTML is this, and this is the JavaScript code. Here I'm going to put in JQuery code, and I'm going to say hash or the message would have I think this is not the right page. See, the text has vanished when I clicked on it. So that kind of an animation effect can be provided. So you can display an error message which automatically goes off after, like, say 3 seconds or so, and the time interval that you specify is in milliseconds. So if you want it to be 3 seconds, you will have to give 3000, and it will fade out after let's say I'll put it as 2 seconds, and even I'll do the same for the password. In case the password error message also shows up, it will display and then go away after So those error messages are gone. You would think that these kind of fancy things are probably not required. You'll be surprised that we do have requirements from the clients where the user doesn't even want to click OK on an error message. They want the dialog box to automatically fade away. So, so it's not very uncommon to do this kind of things, and it's very straightforward doing it with JQuery. You didn't put in much code here. Okay. So in order to provide those visual effects, you can use some of these functions like fade in, fade out, fade toggle, hide, show toggle. With a timer, it gives you an animation field. Without a timer, it'll be immediately done. With jQuery, when you are calling those methods, you don't need to call one method at a time. You can call all the methods on the selected elements in whichever order you want them to be executed. So, and this is called as chaining. So, in this case, for the element which has ID P1, I'm changing the style sheet color to red, and then I'm moving up and moving down. So again, we can try this simple example. So let's go back to our code. Let's select an element that we will move up and down when so I given this element a login header, the ID of login header. So here the element ID is, I could have also just used the element selector, which is a span tag like I did earlier, and so let's see what happens when we click on the button here. So you see that the text is going up and down and the top. Okay, first it slid up and then slid down. So again, I don't think you would need to spend time on all the methods that are out there, but it is suffice to know that you can produce animation effects using some of this action available. And the beauty of it is it can be performed on any kind of an element. I can take a div element, I can take a table element, whatever those HTML elements are, you would be able to do it. Most important thing is for you to understand how to select the elements on which these methods need to be applied. There are other kind of animations. I'm not going to spend time on that. I mean, if you want, you can take a look at the W3 schools. There are some animation examples. I don't think that's of much use to us. In order to manipulate the style sheets on elements or the classes, style sheet classes that are used on elements, you have some of these methods here. Add class adds a style sheet class to an existing element. So let's say there is a button in your web page without any styling information. I can or any element in the page, I can add in a style sheet class using this add class method, and I can add multiple classes by giving a blank space between the names. So in this case, I have this important and blue style sheet classes defined in my HTML page, and dynamically through code, when the user clicks on a button or one event is triggered, I am modifying the look and feel of some of the components on the web page. Similarly, I can remove a style sheet class that has been applied on a particular element. Toggle classes, it is used to switch this particular class, style sheet class being assigned on that element, so that alternately, this class will be applied and displayed to the user when that event is triggered. CSS, we already seen an example. We changed the background color for that text box earlier. So, so in this example, I'm setting for the paragraph element the background color to be yellow. So all of this would be in response to some events that you would want to handle, and you can essentially modify the styles on any element in the page using one of these methods. More often than not, you would be using the CSS method to apply custom styles on elements. In order to retrieve the values or the content of the elements, you have methods called text, HTML, and val. Text method is used to return if I select a particular element and I say dot text, it is going to strip off all the HTML tags in that parent element and give me the child content without the HTML tags. If I do HTML, then it is going to fetch me all the content, including the HTML text that is part of it. I mean, this is needed if you want to manipulate it for whatever reason. Val is primarily used for your input elements like text boxes, your drop-down lists and stuff in order to retrieve the value of the current drop-down button or the drop-down list or the text box that has been given to you. So just a quick example again. I'm going to add, instead of dumping everything in the same button event, I'll create another button and I'll call it and I'm going to write this function here. So let's say we want to display to the users the content of let's say whatever is inside this particular div element. I'm going to call this div element first child, and in JavaScript you can either use double quotes or single quotes for defining your element attribute values. You can mix them both. I mean, you cannot have a double quote and then a single quote ending. It has to be either double quotes or single quote. So in this, when you click on this button, I'm going to display the contents of this particular element. How do I retrieve that particular element? Again, I'm going to use hash ID and then select the element. Dot text is going to get me all text, and I'm going to put it in a string and concatenate it just to display some debug messages. In order to retrieve value of an input element, you have to use the val method. In order to set the value also, you would be using the val method. So here I would be I'm clicking on retrieve text method. So as you can see, text without HTML it is displaying the login ID, then the password, country, USA, India, Australia. The rest of it is all HTML element, so it doesn't display any of it. With HTML, you'll see it displays all the HTML tags that are part of this parent element. So it started with p class equal to my font, then the table tags, the login ID label, and then the input elements. And val returns me the value of the input element. So these are straightforward methods. If you want to add content to existing elements, you can do append. Append adds the content towards the end of that element content. Prepend adds to the beginning. After and before inserts the elements before the current element and not inside the current element. So append and prepend, the text is added within the element. After and before, it's added before or after the element, not as part of the selected element. And you can remove the contents of the current element by using either the remove or the empty property. In order to manipulate the positioning of the elements, again you can use some of these properties. Width height gives you the width and height of the selected element. Inner width adds the actual, between the elements there is some spacing which is called as padding in HTML. It includes that padding. For elements you can also define border, and then there is a margin that is there by default. So you have these various methods to get the width and height, inner width and outer width, or outer height and inner height. And these are the various dimensions that we retrieve when you call those methods. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but those are utility methods. And using this, we could have achieved positioning like what you have seen in this here. So when you are resizing it, I'm changing the top position based on the width of my current window and the width of this particular area that I want to be centered. So if it has to be centered, I get the width of the window, and then I get the width of this area. I subtract the two, and then the left position will be half of whatever that subtracted value is, so that it is centered on the x-axis. Similarly, on the y-axis, I get the heights, I subtract them, divide them by 2, and give top position for define the top position for where this element should be started. So once I define the left and the top position, it is automatically going to be centered. So we do some of those manipulations in code using these methods. So how do I, how is JQuery traversing through the elements? So far we have seen by just specifying the element types or IDs or class selectors and all of that. If you have a hierarchy like this, under the root, if you had a div element under which you had a unordered list in which there were 2 list items, this first list item had 2 span elements, it builds this virtual hierarchy. And using this method like parent, parents, parents until, or children, it's able to traverse through the hierarchy. So instead of specifying more those some of the previous ways that I've listed earlier, you can also use the parent method. Let's say if I want to get the parent of this li tag, what would be the parent? The parent, when I call this parent method on this li tag, it would return me ul. If I call the parents method, then it would return me ul and div, because it is a descendant of div and ul. Similarly, children and find, and for siblings you have what is called as next, next all, or previous, previous all. So at the same level, it is able to go to the next sibling or next children. I have put in some examples in the slides here. I would like you guys to try it out to fetch this information, and let me know if you have any issues. We can practice tomorrow. just like parents, I was telling you siblings is, this li tag is a sibling of the other li tag. The next method also returns the next sibling that is there immediately. If there were 3 li tags, next all would have returned all the other 2 li tags. With next method, it would return only the next one, and you also have next until. But the idea is using this sibling or parent or next or previous, you would be able to traverse up the hierarchy or across the hierarchy, however you want to. So this is where we just put in information around first, last, equal to, filter. Filter is within the selected elements. If you want to further filter based on some criteria, you can filter function. And not operator can also be used to get all the elements which doesn't meet that particular criteria. Whatever we discussed so far pertains to selectors using which you would be able to select your elements, and we also discussed some methods using which you would be able to perform actions either visual or otherwise. I would like to do a simple example based on what we have discussed till now. I would want to, in this page, instead of the country being drop down, I want in a radio button, I want it to be a drop down that is populated when I click on the button, and we'll expand on that in the next session where we'll retrieve that list dynamically by calling it themselves. Okay, so I'm taking the same page again. I'm adding a I'm not removing the existing code. I'm adding a new country list, which is a drop down. And instead of the radio buttons, I want it to be a drop down list. How do you represent a drop down list in HTML? You use a select tag, and I'm going to give it a name. And I'm going to close it's always a good practice to first put in the opening and closing tags and then populate the rest of it. And here, if I want to pop my elements within the drop-down list, I'm going to say empty value. And I'm going to add one more button. When you click on it, I'm going to populate this drop-down using code instead of directly typing in the HTML. It's always a good idea to put them in quotes. Instead of defining that on-click event here as a good practice, I'm going to define the event using JQuery. How do I define my events using JQuery? I want to handle the click event when the user clicks on this button. So to invoke the JQuery for function, again, $. To select the current element, I put in the ID by putting in hash, and my ID of the element is btn populate dropdown. And I want to handle the click function. So for click function, I would put it in parentheses. So here I would say close parenthesis, and then I want to execute this particular function. the function is put in braces, so any brace I open, I need to close it. So always do this before you write any code, and indent your code so that you clearly know that you are not missing anything there. So when the user clicks on this button, the function should essentially populate the drop-down. In order to populate the drop-down, before I populate it, I want to get rid of this current entry and repopulate it. So to do that, again, I have to select my element. So in this case, my element ID is CMB country list. And I'm going to call the method empty. This is the method that I showed you earlier. So empty or remove, you could use any of those methods. So in this case, I'm just going to call the method empty. And then I'll just display a message box saying so what I'll do is, in order to populate that drop down, there are multiple ways to do it. I would essentially create the HTML that would be part of the drop down, and that could create it, or you can also do it, create elements called option through code. Let me do it the HTML way. I just defined a string called options HTML, and for now I'm going to hard code the countries list. So options HTML equals, in order to put in an option tag, in order to put in an entry into a list, into a drop-down list, you use a HTML tag called option. And for every option tag, you would need to define the value. Since it's going to contain empty spaces potentially in the values, you should always put it in quotes. And since I put in this string in double quotes, all my inside values would be in single quotes. If I want to use double quote, I would need to escape it. For escaping, you would use backslash. But I'm avoiding all of that complexity. I'm just putting in I'm closing that option again. I'm just populating a string with the HTML. The text here is the value that is going to be displayed to the user, and this is the value that is internally passed. So both those values could be different when you're specifying an option. I put in, there was a typo here. I forgot to close the option tag correctly. This would have failed. So any tag I open, I also close. And then how can I populate this as part of that particular element? We spoke about the HTML property earlier. So I'm just going to type in .html, and it is going to be populated with this particular string. So the moment you do that, it would be populated. Right now I have hard-coded it. In the next session, using an AJAX call to a web service, you can retrieve the information dynamically and display it. So right now you see that the drop-down is empty, and it says please select a valid country. If I click on populate drop-down, this is the alert message that I displayed, and you will see my values are populated. How did I populate this dynamically? Using just the HTML property, HTML method on this particular element. So what you have seen today is how do you identify this different elements using these various selectors that are available, and then perform different methods on them. I would like you guys to try out some of the examples that we did today, they are kind of straightforward, and they're probably also there in the slides. I'll also send the HTML pages that we have done. Next class, next session will be interesting. I thought I could get to Ajax implementations today, but I have a hard stop now, so we'll cover it in the next session. With Ajax, from your JavaScript code, you would be communicating with remote web services, retrieving the information, and we've already seen how to manipulate the current page. So for the drop-down list, I can be getting the information from some web service and populating it dynamically after the page is loaded. We have also seen some event handling code today. So try out those examples. Let me know if you run into any issues, and we can cover the rest in the next session. Next session, I'll be covering Ajax primarily, and let me know if you want to do any specific example. Otherwise, the last session we'll cover just a dummy thing that I'm putting together, dummy project that I'm putting together. Okay, any questions? Okay, yeah, the silence is probably killing. I'm not sure if anybody is following anything. I would have been happy if you guys had some questions. But again, programming is something that you cannot just listen to. You need to try it out on your own for you to get any doubts. So there is no rocket science here. It's whatever we have discussed is just figuring out the syntax for performing whatever actions that could be done on these various objects. So far, we have just discussed how do I use JQuery libraries, how do I identify these various objects using selectors, and what are the different kinds of methods that it supports to perform whatever actions. Okay. The real part of JQuery is with Ajax, which we'll discuss in the next session.
Okay, thanks,
Professor.
Yeah, everyone, I will send out the details as to when the next class is. This time, we'll give enough notice. Most likely, sometime by Tuesday or Wednesday is when I'll send you the details for the next session. And as Vikram has said, please do